evening and welcome everyone on behalf of the implementation subcommittee of the Reimagining Public Safety Task Force of the City of Richmond. I am proud to be here with colleagues of mine who are all part of the ONS subgroup of the implementation committee. We're looking forward to presenting some information to you tonight. If we can go ahead and get the slides started, I believe that Marcus is going to take it away.
Ooh, okay, right to the point. Whenever you're ready. Is it Stephanie? Are you going to be handling that, or?
I can if you wish.
Or should we wait for some more folks, or are we ready to go? What do you think?
It's all up to you.
Helen? I want to wait for a couple. I can only see 6 people here. So am I
I think you're just seeing the
Am I hallucinating?
You have
Oh, okay.
18 attendees as well.
Oh, okay. All right. Let's do it. Let's do this.
All right. I can also do the slideshow if you'd like.
No, it's cool. I mean, whomever wants to do it. I think Deborah. Okay, Deborah, did you get upgraded to a panelist?
Yes, she's here now.
Okay. Whomever wants to start it, I'm ready to begin. So, hello, everybody. We're here. Our presentation tonight will be discussing the Office of Neighborhood Safety, and we will have a pretty brief presentation about, well, I'll discuss that in a minute. Next slide, please. And so I just wanted to talk about some of the procedures here. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A feature. We'll be reading the questions aloud in the Q&A segment later. But if you can also use the chat for different reasons, but there is no questions will be monitored in the chat box. So just wanted to let you know that. And let's introduce who we are. So the presenters will be Helen Burks, who you just heard from. She's a task force member and on the ONS subcommittee for the Richmond Reimagining Public Safety Task Force. I'm also Marcus Injasang, a task force member. Deborah is here, as you can see, with her wonderful background there. She's also a task force member. And real quick, James Houston needs to be made a panelist. So if we can make that happen, that's a kind of a segue because he is with the Office of Neighborhood Safety, as you can see down here. He'll be on the panel. Later, there'll be a panel where you can ask questions and get certain information from. Who will be on that panel will be Mr. Sam Bond, who will also be presenting tonight, who is the program director. I believe that is his title. I could be wrong. Please correct me. For the Office of Neighborhood Safety, we have Joe McCoy, who is also going to be on the panel, who's with the Office of Neighborhood Safety. And like I said before, James Houston, who's with ONS as well. I don't know if the panel thing has been resolved, but hopefully it will by the end of this presentation. So, introduction. So what our purpose really is just to provide an overview. A lot of you out there, I'm sure, are familiar with this program, but of course, we always want to keep reiterating what this program is and what it does. So it's basically just an overview of the program and discuss how it's been successful and as a tool to reduce gun violence in the community. The Richmond Reimagining Public Safety Community Task Force, us, fairly recently was able to advocate for an increase in funding for the Office of Neighborhood Safety, and we effectively doubled the budget. So it's a lot of exciting things to come from ONS. And so later on, we'll be discussing how some of those funds will be utilized to make the program even more effective. So again, what we'll be discussing, I'll be discussing really briefly the the origin of ONS and some of the previous successes they've had. Sam will be talking about what's going on right now and some of the things that are some of the exciting impacts that it's having now, and discuss some of the staffing things and that nature. And then Helen will be discussing the next steps in utilization of funds that were allocated to ONS. So ONS, the origin, in 2006, the mayor, city council, and the community, really many members of the community wanted to address the problem, the issue, the challenge of gun violence in the community. And so made some plans to help reduce the rate of gun violence in Richmond. So ONS was established, and it was established as a non-law enforcement department within the city. And the goal was to reduce firearm assaults and injury and associated deaths having to do with firearm violence, gun violence. And the strategy was simple: just to engage the community who have been historically impacted by gun violence, and build relationships and provide resources to members of that community. So some of the highlights and past successes of ONS. Since its inception, the city of Richmond has recorded the lowest number of firearm assaults and homicides in more than 30 years. It's been a model nationwide and has received a lot of praise, worldwide praise and nationwide praise, and has gotten a lot of media coverage. And one of the examples of that, some of you might remember that President Biden referenced ONS in one of his speeches and as a model for reducing gun violence, and talked about its success in one of his speeches on the 23rd of June in 2021. So now I'm going to pass it over to my friend, Mr. Vaughn, Sam Vaughn, who is with ONS, and he's going to discuss what's going on currently. So go ahead, Sam, take it away.
Thank you very much, Marcus.
Very welcome, sir.
So as the slide says, I'm trying to see myself. All right, so as the slide says, the current structure, that we have 8 full-time staff, 1 program manager, which is myself, project coordinator, a program coordinator, and 5 NCAs. This was increased in the 2020-2021 budget cycle. Prior to that, we had 6 full-time staff for a number of years. It was a council member right before the budget cycle asked if we can get 2 more NCAs. That was approved by the rest of the council. And so we've had 8 full-time staff since February of last year. Normally with our staff, we have an annual contact number of 5,000 plus, anywhere between 5,000 and 6,000. And the same with the hours, anywhere between 53 to 6,500 per year. The 2 primary strategies, the initial strategy that was involved in the creation of our office was our street outreach strategy. And not to go back onto your presentation, Marcus, but the initial strategy was what the office was kind of based on, what it was approved to do. And it was to do street outreach in the communities most affected by gun violence within the city of Richmond. Initially, we were set in the Iron Triangle, which had 27 of the 45 homicides in 2006. And so we followed that process. We had all of our assets in the Iron Triangle, and the following year, we had 3 homicides compared to the 27 in that area. So most everybody was saying, hey, congratulations, we found the solution. Let's do this across the city. but they were still attempting to do it with the 4 outreach workers. So you're trying to do more with the same capacity. And of course, 2008, we saw that amazing, drastic decrease. But in 2009, it went right back up. We were trying to do too much with not enough resources. So we understood our mission, and can appreciate the fact that we had the ability, I should say, to adjust. And so we used data, we used information, we used research, and we laser focused our assets on trying to make sure that we did the most with what we had. And so that became the creation of the Operation Peacemaker Fellowship in 2010. Our first cohort was in June of 2010. And the fellowship was literally, instead of engaging communities, we engaged the folks who made those communities, made the data in those communities. A lot of folks say hot spots, but we decided to focus on hot people instead of hot spots, which was the creation of the fellowship, engaging those at the center of and most impacted by gun violence in a much more strategic and determined way. The general fund pays for staffing, operational costs. There was a lot of I ain't gonna say negative press, but there was a lot of conflict in our strategy saying that taxpayer funds shouldn't be going to these types of people, so to speak. So we always wanted to make sure that we said that, you know, the general fund pays for staffing, operational costs, vehicles, benefits, things of that nature, but every resource that we give the community, we go out and raise. For the most part, historically, we've doubled our budget with the funds we've raised. Excuse me. That will be a tough order to continue to do with the additional resources, but we will try, because we believe that this community deserves everything that we can do for them. And so essentially, like we move, we're fluid, because our motivation is to disrupt the normal cycles of gun violence and help create a different norm to where violence is not the first option. Next slide, please. So with the information that we had, with the data that we were able to have access to when we initially started, we historically have engaged the conflicts that have caused the biggest percent of gun violence within the city when we first started, and up to recent memory, that conflict has normally been between North and Central Richmond. The majority of victims have been African American, and so that's what we focused on. In doing so, as Marcus mentioned, in 2014, we had the lowest recorded homicide rate in over 40 years. We are definitely above that, not by much, but we have increased since then, slowly, but kind of steadily. But even with that being said, we've been able to maintain a 65 to 82% in reductions in shootings that have led to injury or death since our 2007 numbers when we were created. One thing that's very interesting, and I would like to point out, is everybody across the country. 2020 was a pretty bad year across this country when it comes to this. This has been an unprecedented situation in all of our lifestyles. And we just had to accept that. We didn't have our first homicide in 2020 until after the lockdown. And then they just kind of continued in a very unprecedented way over the last few years. And we had to accept that. We had to acknowledge that things are different. Things can't work as normal the way we were We're working them because the situation has changed drastically. And so we had to adjust. And in the process of adjusting in 2021, how 2020 across the board, across the country, everybody increased. 2021 across the board, across the country, we have an average of 25% increase in gun violence and homicides. In urban America, that can easily be 50 to 100% increase. But in Richmond, it's an 18% decrease. So 2020 shocked us all. And that's a great thing about this organization. We can acknowledge what's happening right in front of us, and we have the flexibility and the ability to maneuver the way we need to maneuver to accomplish our goal. And so we were able to do that. We were able to shift. And I can argue that every other city across this country that has dealt with this historically, they're 50%, 100% increase in their shootings that have led to injury or death, and we're at 18% decrease. Now, have we matched our lowest numbers and our goal? No, but we are definitely on the right track. We're trending in the right direction, and we're continuing to try to figure out ways to get these numbers down even lower. And the only way we can do that, which has been kind of a hindrance for a lot of other communities to be able to have this kind of impact, is we feel that those who are most responsible and most influential and most impacted by gun violence need to have the strongest voice and the most influence on how this issue is dealt with. And so that's what we do. We focus on the community that we serve. It might not be accepted by the community at large, but we deal with the community that we serve, and we try to partner with them to come up with solutions that will make their lives better, make the community safer, and create more healthy and sustainable processes for us all to live peaceful. Like that's our goal. We don't believe any member of the community is greater than or less than. We believe that everyone counts, that everyone matters, and we believe that their voice needs to be heard, and that's what we try to accomplish.
Whew. As always, Sam, you're a tough act to follow. But I appreciate just where you left off with the impacts and what we're seeing now, because what we're seeing now as far as the needs of the community really flow into my section, which is next steps and utilization of funds. So as Sam was saying, there's been change since ONS originated, and there's been, with the increased funding, the ability to better target the needs of the community. So these are some of the needs that we have recognized, that ONS has recognized, that the data shows as far as needs in order to prevent gun violence in our community. And there are also specific attributes that are going to be part of the neighborhood change agents as far as unique skill sets to be able to target these different groups. So the first being the huge need for having Spanish-speaking staff, as well as staff to specifically outreach within the Latinx community. Also, there has been an increase in the age. I think the median age was the number that we talked about. The median age of those involved in these shootings has shifted older. So there's a need to have a greater number of contacts who are not only with the young people where a lot of the work started, but shifting older in order to get at the root. There's also a need for shifts to cover later in the evening, because there's a lot that happens at that time. And so with increased funds, they're now able to have more staff covering a larger portion of the day and night. There's also a partnership with the schools. So instead of trying to do all the work through finding people out in the community, really trying to get that partnership and see what's going on inside the schools, see where the needs are, and be able to shore up partnerships with other existing efforts that exist within our schools. And of course, serving more women and girls. Another data point from this past year had to do with the number of young women who were involved. And so there's a need for that to be an expanded portion of the work of ONS. So to get kind of specific with the utilization of funds, the services that we're talking about, this expansion of services, will be implemented through hiring of neighborhood change agents, who Sam's already referenced. And we are also making sure that these neighborhood change agents have competitive salaries and are able to implement the new structure with other positions that can really firm up and shore up that work. So these other positions that were added with the recent resolution from the City Council from last week include a deputy director, 2 field coordinators, an accounting assistant, an administrative aide, and then the neighborhood change agents. So you can see this is actually the word for word regarding the resolution that was adopted by the City Council on January 11th, 2022. And if you see here, it's a little easier to read here what the exact structure is going to be in the end, because there's some shifting that has to happen. If any of you have worked in this city or anywhere else where there has to be a lot of position control, you know that there's a lot of work that really goes into making sure that the positions have the right description, are fit in the right kind of reporting order. So there's been a lot of work. Some positions are shifting, some are added positions. So I really want to give kudos from the outside looking in to Sam and his staff, just for being super intentional, and for their starting point always being the needs of the community and what the data is showing. And so that's this new structure results in 11 neighborhood change agents, 3 administrative staff, a deputy director, program manager, and 2 field coordinators. So you'll get to meet some of these people in this next section that we're coming to, but I want to just make sure that it's really clear where we are in the process of this. So the goal is to expand from a staff of 8 full-time positions to 18 full-time positions. The budget has been submitted and is now pending the approval process, right? So it needs to get approved by the right places internally within the city, and then eventually go to City Council for full approval. Once that happens, that's then when the new positions can get posted and the hiring process can begin. So we knew that it would take a lot of kind of lead up time anytime you're talking about adding personnel within the city. And so that's where we are. Just want to be really transparent. So this new staff that ONS is anticipating are not in the organization yet. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce 3 people that I've had the joy and honor to not only know through this work, but to know because as a local educator, our lives have intersected in caring for common young people between us. So Sam has already introduced himself a little bit, but I'm going to give him more of a chance to introduce himself in a moment. We also have the wonderful Joe McCoy and James Houston here on the line with us. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask the whole panel the same first question. And after that, answer that. Then we'll come to the questions submitted in the Q&A. Please remember, don't speak your question out loud. Make sure that your questions are submitted into Q&A, and then we'll read through those, and the panel, as well as if it's pertinent to the implementation committee members who are part of the presentation, will respond. So without further ado, the question that I have for all of you is, can you just in your own words tell us what you do and why do you do it? And I'm going to leave it up to y'all who's going to go first.
I'll start just to make sure that the other staff feels a little bit comfortable.
Got it. Thank you, Sam.
And so I started this work in 2008, not too long after, about 5 months after the office was up and running. And I onboarded because it was very unique. I did not have this in my plans for life, to be completely honest. I felt like what I was going to have to do was intentional in my own circles, because most ONS employees have their own personal circles that are involved in this madness, as most ONS employees at one point in their time in their life were involved in this madness. And so I felt like it was an honor to be able to do this. And I started off as a part-time peacekeeper, went up to a full-time NCA. After about 5 years, was promoted to a program coordinator. And after a few years after that, program manager. I believe this work is important. I believe that my life would have been drastically changed had I had somebody like me in it when I was at the age of destruction, so to speak. And the community deserves it. We can talk about all the things that caused this. We can have those arguments. We can pull up data. We can disagree or agree to disagree. But bottom line is that every single individual on this planet deserves love, appreciation, deserves to feel like they matter, deserves to feel like they deserve to breathe and exist. And in a lot of areas, what we've done is we've separated the haves and the have-nots. And I refuse to exist in or allow others that had no choice of their own to exist in a caste system. We are not the untouchables. We deserve to breathe the same air as every other human being on this planet and have access to success. And so when I got the opportunity to be involved in this, which was completely new, the first Office of Violence Prevention in this country, it was unheard of. Thank God for the leadership of Richmond to think outside of the box and try to find alternative solutions to what normally was the response to these types of issues that, I think we all can agree, we tried them for decades and they just didn't work. And so I appreciated the ingenuity of this opportunity, and I believed in it, and I went 100% to do the best that I could to make it work. Next.
Hello, I'm James Houston with the Office of Neighborhood Safety. I'm the program coordinator. I got into this work. I was incarcerated for homicide in 1996 in Richmond. I grew up in Richmond. During my incarceration, I was able to take advantage of a lot of programs. Participating in those programs kind of got me to open up and see a lot of things that I needed. And one of the things I always said I want to do was honor my victim. And then in about 2006, before ONS was started, I met Devon. He came into the prison and I was doing something called the Richmond Project. I was the chairman of it. And through our relationship there, he said that, if I ever got out because I had a life sentence, that he would have, and he was doing something in Richmond, he'd have a job for me. And so with all the skills I acquired while incarcerated, substance abuse counseling, rape and crisis counseling, and facilitating different groups, I felt like it was a perfect fit. And so like Sam said, I did all that, being able to give young men things that I didn't have growing up, I felt like made a difference, which I saw while incarcerated. Men who had a lot more time, were older, took me under their wings and kind of, navigated me through programs. So that's why I'm a part of ONS.
Good afternoon. It's very hard to follow my two comrades. They're very eloquent when they speak. My name is Joe McCoy. Right now, I'm a neighborhood change agent. I have been a neighborhood change agent since the conception of the program. I was one of the first 4 hired. I started this work because 30 years ago when I sat in the jail cell, I saw my first son for the first time through a monitor. I was incarcerated for, I think, a gun and drug offense. And I sat and I told myself, when released, I would do everything in my power to try to right all the wrongs that helped tear up Richmond. Because when the crew that I hung with in 1991, 92 and down was probably some of the reasons that the murder rate was up. So when I got out, I started working for different nonprofits within the city. Some were poverty pimps, some were normal, beautiful programs. But I really got discouraged with a lot of the programs within the city of Richmond because I felt that they were not youth friendly, especially not urban youth, not for brothers that are brown and Black. So when I talked to Devon Bogan, I think 2006 or 7, it was like the brother had a halo over his head. I just wanted to be a part of his team because the things that he talked about and he brought into fruition were different. And I just wanted to be a part of that strategy, and I wanted to really make a difference in my community. So that's why I do the work.
Thank you so much for all three of you. It was actually wonderful for me to get to hear more of your stories. Like I said, my path has intersected mostly in conversation around young people that we know. Oftentimes, do you know? Why, yes, I do know this person. So it's just good to have more of the why, because I've seen the how in action. So I just want to thank you each for blessing us with your story and your vulnerability. It means a lot. So with that, I'm going to go ahead with our first question, and I'll put it in the chat so you guys can read it as well visually. The question says, how have other community issues like the housing crisis or displacement of folks to areas outside of Richmond influenced the reduction in gun violence?
I don't know if it influenced a reduction. I'll say that it's been a problem for us because when, and if I'm misspeaking, Sam, help me out. When our young people who claim Richmond decided or they were displaced in other communities, what they do is they still come back into Richmond. So we have to be more proactive in talking to them when we see them, because most folks who do dirt out here may not even live in this area.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. So yeah, what he's saying is absolutely true. It actually, the displacement has hindered our success. It hasn't helped because this is folks' stomping grounds. This is where they're from. This is where their partners are at. This is where they do their dirt, so to speak. And so them not living here hinders us from not having the amount of access that we would need to try to help change behavior. So anybody who says that gentrification has helped this process, I would argue that that's the exact opposite.
Thank you. I'm going to ask the next question, but there's also a comment submitted from the same person. So I'll lead with their comment. Their comment says, OMG, I was one of the first fellows in 2010, or one of those years, but wow, really honored to be in space and appreciate all the work in ONS. It's so fruitful to hear the great news and the impact you've had on our city. And the next steps sound amazing. Thank you. The question they wrote is partnering with local organizations or agencies a part of the planning for expansion?
So yes, we have not been able to do what we've done without partnering with other CBOs across this community. As Joe mentioned a little earlier, we've seen decades of organizations raising resources due to the statistics that this community has provided them. But very rarely did we see those resources address the issue, because very rarely did they touch the individuals causing those statistics that raised the resources in the first place. And so that's kind of what we shifted. We kind of changed. Instead of going out there looking for organizations who say they do certain work, we're looking for people. And now if these young people who are dealing with this issue are saying they want to have resources from a certain organization, that gives the credibility to us. We kind of let them dictate with the proper guidance and barriers to kind of create their own like success plan. But there's a lot of organizations out there who say they do work to help reduce and eliminate gun violence when they're not dealing with those involved in gun violence. And so our argument is, how are you reducing? I mean, maybe 10 years from now, if you do it effectively, if, excuse me, if the school district was 100% effective, if CBOs and sports programs and after school programs and recreation centers, like if they did everything 100% effectively, in 10 years, like we shouldn't exist. But it's not happening. And the folks who need it the most somehow find their way to get to that place to where they're ineligible for support because of their behavior. Yet their behavior is the exact reason and creates the exact statistics that allow folks to get the resources to support them, but yet they're ineligible. When you take a young person, when you finally get somebody to say, you know what, I think I have a substance abuse problem, which is great. And then you take them to a treatment facility, you take them to a program that says, we help people with substance abuse problems. And the first thing they hear is, we're so happy you're here, but come back when you're not high. Well, if I knew how to do that, I wouldn't need to come here in the first place. And so what we're challenging is the fact that if you say you help people in whatever area you say that is, they shouldn't have to do something to be eligible for your services. Like who they are and what they're going through should make them eligible for your services. And what we've seen throughout the years is the baggage that they bring, which is the baggage that's created the circumstances that they're in, which is what created their need for you, makes them ineligible to receive what you have for them. And that's we just don't agree with that. And so we're very, very careful about those we partner with, because they need to be on the same page we are. And our argument is we're the Southwest of organizations. Like your baggage flies for free with us.
I can take the next couple one, Helen.
Okay.
Give you a little break. So next question here I see is from an anonymous attendee. It's actually you guys confiscate guns, and what do you do with them if you do?
So we don't like confiscate guns.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? I mean, I don't mind. I'm talking too much. So Joe, James, please feel free. But we don't confiscate guns. If somebody wants to, we've had a couple circumstances to where somebody was like, this is bad for me and I don't need it. And they didn't want to give it to somebody else, because then it would have created a situation to where someone may be harmed and they didn't want to be responsible or a part of that either. And so we have had guns turned into us, which we're grateful for the relationship with RPD. We were able to just give them to them, no questions asked. But we don't believe like guns are the problem, so to speak. We believe what people do with guns are the problem. Mm-hmm. So that's why, like, we've never, me personally, I've never like fallen into the whole little gun buyback concept and all of those things, because no one who wants to use a gun is going to sell it for less than what they paid for it.
Yeah, true.
There are certain folks who are like, you know what, I want to follow the process. If giving this away is going to keep somebody from being harmed because my house can get broken into or somebody can steal it, yeah, that's one thing. But anybody who's adamant about using a gun to deal with their conflict isn't selling their gun. And so that doesn't change our dynamic any. We don't have no authority to arrest. We have no authority to confiscate. We have no authority to do anything that our participant won't allow us to do just based on the relationship that we have with them.
And also,
Go ahead, brother.
and also, we don't lead with that put your gun down thing either, because the way we look at this, what we try to do is we try to empower our young people and surround them with enough healthy people as possible, so they'll make the right decision to decide to put their own gun down. Because if we put that upon us and say, you know what, we need you to do X, Y, and Z, and something happens to that person, sometimes that leans on us. So what we want to do is just empower this person to be as healthy as possible, put him in as many healthy situations, showing some healthy travel, and hopefully, which has been working for us, they decide that I no longer want to be a part of this foolishness, this madness, this confused war.
Gotcha. All right. Thanks, y'all. And we have a kind of a comment / question-ish thing here from Marva Lyons. And it says, after hearing your mission, maybe it'll be nice to have someone from ONS speak at my neighborhood watch meeting, Hilltop Green, and briefly share your overview so there's a better understanding. We meet every third Thursday on Zoom. Is that something?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that we have to just accept as part of growth. Knowledge is power. The bad thing about that is more knowledge creates more dissension or disruption or division, because like we acknowledge that there's a lot of people, when they really understand what we do, like they don't approve. And we're just trying to bring humanity back to these individuals who might possibly have never really lived or understood a humane lifestyle or situation. So we just want to honor that. Like we want to honor those who have done everything right in life. You know, they've played by the rules. They've worked hard to accomplish what they've accomplished. They've able to achieve their goals and their lifestyle and their life commitments without, you know, questioning their beliefs. But on the flip side of that, like there's a lot of people who never had that opportunity. And so our argument is we can't dismiss them because they didn't have the same opportunities and resources and healthy adults in their life to create a pathway for them. Like this path was created long before anybody that we're dealing with right now. Everything that created how they act and respond to conflict was destined for them long before they took their first breath. So we just want to honor that. We want to give them an opportunity. And, you know, kind of like G.I. Joe, like no one's half the battle. Now the second half is up to you, but we have to be able to give them that first half. Like we have to be able to acknowledge that they might not have all the information they need to succeed the way a normal, healthy adult in our society feels success should be accomplished. So yes, we're more than willing to come and address, you know, neighborhood councils, just giving them updates. We understand that this process is it's new, and now with the resources that we have, like there's going to be folks looking, especially with the task force. Everybody's involved. Everybody wants to have their issues heard and addressed. And so yeah, that's going to be part of our process. But like once again, we can't promise you're going to like everything that we have to say, because like we don't move the way a normal organization or department moves. Like we believe that every last one of these young people are citizens of our community. They deserve citizenship like every other citizen in this community, and their voice should be heard and their needs should be addressed.
Thank you so much for that. There are 3 questions that I'm grouping together because they all have to do with how do you partner or not with law enforcement. So some of the kind of sub questions, so you can kind of be thinking about them. There's one that asks, what has that experience been like? And then it talks about, especially after a movement to defund police. I do want to clarify that that's not what this implementation group is working on, or that that's just not part of that movement, to be honest. There is another question about this that says, well, there's a statement that says you do not work with RPD as part of, and I'll come back to the other pieces of that question. And then there's a question that says, how do you work together, or how do you help community navigate once they're involved with law enforcement? So can you just kind of speak to that general issue?
Anybody, or is it on me? We got a panel for a reason. All right, I'll go. Please add anything that I missed, James, Joe. So like and I think what we need to address first is the concept of like working together. So like when you're driving a car, like the brakes are working together with the gas tank, but yet they have nothing to do with each other, so to speak. So we're working together to try to accomplish the same goal. I truly believe that. Like I truly believe that RPD like wants a healthy Richmond. They want the ability for people who live here, work here, play here to feel safe here. And that's the same thing that we're trying to accomplish. I think what we're doing is we're just looking at it differently. I think law enforcement in general has a concept of anybody who breaks the law is the problem. And I think when you look at like kind of grassroots and people who are like from community who've experienced what the community they're serving has experienced, it couldn't be more further than like polar opposites, so to speak. You're not going to arrest your way out of this problem. And one thing that we really do is we pride ourselves on data and research. Not that we've learned anything new that folks haven't known for the last 100 years, but we've been able to have this little pilot process to be able to just have that form of communication that people seem to give more credence to. So like data has shown the bigger the police budget, the more police you have on the streets, the more sworn officers, the more prisons you build, the more beds you have in jail, the more people incarcerated. The budgets are huge, the spending is ridiculous, the problem is not solved. It's not solved. Historically, right now where we are because of the pandemic, there's been 3 times in the last 100 years that we've been in this place to where we've had over 9+ people per 100,000 in this country shot or killed. And the only other 2 times has been the late 80s, early 90s after the crack epidemic, which we arrested all kinds of people, didn't change anything. And then the other time was 1929, 1930 during the Great Depression. So one thing that data shows us is it's not a people problem. It's an institutional issue. When folks do not feel like their basic needs are being met, they will go into selfish survival mode and try to fill them by any means necessary. And so partnering with these types of folks, partnering with those who like to live in the shadow, partnering with those who like have a real issue with trust, not only for law enforcement, but just trust in general. We can't have like a buddy, we're at like parks and community fairs. Like we cannot be seen as partners with law enforcement because the community that we're serving has a very historical, like ingrained distrust for law enforcement because once again, historically, they're the enemy. this community and law enforcement has been the enemy. It's cops and robbers, it's good guys versus bad guys. And so it doesn't work. But I do believe that we are trying to accomplish the same goal. We're just doing it differently.
Thank you so much, Sam. I apologize. There's a dog behind me. So I just want to acknowledge what might be distracting for some of you. There are a couple questions that I think are getting at the same root thing, which has to do with, well, how do you prove it? How do you prove that what happens in gun violence in Richmond is a direct result of the work of ONS as opposed to other causes? Another person phrased it by saying, well, don't all the statistics only come from ONS? So I wondered if you could speak to this. What is it like to try to prove the impact of the work of ONS?
It's kind of difficult to quantify things that haven't happened. So you have to get creative. One of the things that I like to think about is, as I said, in 2007, African Americans were about 80% of all shootings, 80 plus of all shootings that have led to injury or death. Now they're down to about 50. And we have specifically, as I spoke earlier, like we specifically dealt with the African American community because that conflict was the largest conflict in the city that was creating the biggest amount of numbers when it came to shootings. I do believe that you can associate every other community that folks can feel is comparative to Richmond, and you'll find no other community that has had the success that we've had when it comes to decreasing gun violence. So the outlier when it comes to that is the Office of Neighborhood Safety. When you talk about the amount of individuals that we serve, when we speak on the fellowship, which our creation of the fellowship, when we sat down and said we need to do something different, and we sat around a table and we was like, all right, let's come up with a list of who do we believe will be dead in the next 6 months based on the information that we have about the conflicts in this city. Let's create that list. And then who do we believe will be responsible for attempting to harm them? And the list is the same, depending on who gets lucky, whoever is able to respond first. And so when we add all of those numbers, and then we talk about the success rate of our fellowship, and what we count as success for our fellowship is how many of our fellows are still alive, how many of our fellows has been shot since becoming a fellow, how many of our fellows do we think are responsible for shooting since becoming a fellow. And when we look at those numbers and we add the amount of people that are involved in that fellowship over the years that are still alive, and then if we just wanted to add up the total number, if we were just staying the same, which we did a data set for the 20 years prior to the fellowship, and we averaged 37.5 homicides a year. And so when we look at it now and we're at 15 or 14, and you add, okay, what if we stayed at 37? That's about 200 homicides that we didn't have over a 10-year period. And that's about the same amount of fellows that we've had. So no one was addressing those young people, like literally no one. And so our argument is, if we weren't addressing them, then why would we think that any other ending would have happened, with the exception of them being passed away or locked up for killing someone else that's a part of that process? That's our deduction. That's how we justify it. And we give ourselves a bigger number because, once again, no one's addressing that. But even if you don't want to look at our numbers, there's a article in the American Journal for Public Health that gave us a 56%. And they got much more resources. They got much more knowledge and experience when it comes to this. And they gave us a 50+% credit for the reduction. We're giving ourselves a little bit more, but yeah, I mean, this is a no-brainer because there's nothing else in this community that's different than any other community, with the exception of the Office of Neighborhood Safety. And there's no other community in this country that's seeing the results that we've seen because they don't have an Office of Neighborhood Safety.
Then we really don't take the credit for the work. We give the credit to the young people for making better decisions.
Thank you, Joe. And I want to expound on that. Like, our existence created the opportunity, but we cannot hold ourselves responsible for someone else's decisions. We can give them the best information we have. We can guide them the best way that we can, but a decision, the person who makes that decision is responsible for that decision. So
Right.
if you don't make them go out and shoot, we can't stop them from going out and shoot. And so thank you for that, Joe. We definitely say the reason that the reductions in gun violence have happened in the city of Richmond is because the young people who would normally respond to gun violence as their first priority are thinking differently.
Thank you. So I do want to recognize we've got 4 minutes left in our time this evening. I'm going to give you one technical question because it was an early question put in, and in case people missed the presentation, I want to make sure they know what is your annual budget now, and what will it be once the additional persons are on board? So can you just kind of recap the expansion for people?
Yeah, so prior to the increase, we were at 1.7. And now for staffing, we will be at 3.7. And there was also a $500,000 increase in that budget to be able to support organizations and CBOs doing work or work that will enhance our work. So
All right.
4.2 altogether.
Thank you.
And we raise about 1.5 every year to be able to do the work. I want to make sure that I say that again, like every bit of the general fund, with the exception of the 500,000 going to CBOs, every bit of the general fund goes to staffing, operational costs. Everything that we do with these young people, we go out and raise the resources and the capital to be able to do it.
Thank you. So I'm going to combine two questions that we have and ask each of you to kind of give a final thought if you can. The question was, what is your vision for 2022, and how can communities get involved?
James?
Well, one of my visions for 2022 is, like I said, we spoke on, have more staff to impact the work. Also, hopefully to be able to see you more, Helen, being in the schools more often with a steady staff members that are stations assigned to the schools. Also, you know, having our young people, helping our young people make better decisions. And I would, as far as the community, I really, we want to get this elder circle back going. So we want to have older, successful, retired people come in and meet some of these young people. What I've noticed is some of these young people are the most charismatic people you would ever want to meet. And they just need somebody to see that in them and help pull it out of them. Also, just as businesses, we need businesses to come aboard and say, we'll work with these young people, give them an opportunity to gain employment.
And not only that, not only businesses, I also wish that the churches will become involved, because we did a study a few years ago and there was 163 surrounding churches within the greater part of Richmond, and we don't have 163 shooters soaking wet. So just imagine if each church took one shooter and gave them every resource within the church and poured love into that one person. What do you think, and how would that change the outlook of some of these young men? Because And sometimes we got to put our money where our mouth is. And sometimes we just don't do it.
In 2022, what I would love to see is the beginning of a long-term shift, because ever since I've been doing this work, I say I love my job, but I hate that it exists. And I really, really like want to work ourselves out of employment. And so I would love 2022 to begin that process. I think we all are great at what we do, but I also think that every last one of us has amazing transferable skills. And I would love for us to be able to use those skills in something that is not so detrimental and traumatizing in the process. I would love for the community. I can't wait for us to get to 0 homicides. I believe it. I believe it can happen. I believe that we can bring it to fruition, but I also think that it's gonna be a much bigger task than the Office of Neighborhood Safety can create on its own. So beginning to create a community, a holistic community, to where everyone in the community is involved in trying to help it be healthy. No matter what your part is, no matter what you can participate in, just everyone's on the same page. Everyone's looking at every single member of the community as important and worthy, and everybody participates in trying to create an amazing, healthy Richmond.
I think that's the perfect final word. I'll open it to Marcus, if there's any final words you want to share. I just want to give you a moment, but on my behalf, on behalf of myself, I just want to thank y'all again for sharing. I want to thank everyone for the questions. I want to acknowledge that there are some we didn't get to, but some of the things that were brought up, each of these is such a deep issue. I didn't want to try to pack more in and have them be rushed, because I think we're trying to do things different, right? That's kind of a theme that you're hearing, is approaching things differently, approaching things effectively, and approaching things together. So I appreciate your patience. If you feel like yours did not get answered tonight, this is not the only opportunity you have. The implementation committee is able to take your questions and pass things along and get some communication out as needed. Marcus, any final words?
I don't. The only words I'd like to say is it's been a pleasure working with you, Sam and Helen, and just getting to really know the nuts and bolts of this wonderful organization. Which when I first joined the task force, this was always really trying to, really have a really nice experience getting to know this program, and I love it. I think it's very effective. I think it's something the community needs, and I'm very happy to be a part of any kind of uplifting of ONS that I can possibly be a part of. So thank you, Sam. Thank you, James. Thank you, Joe, for being on the panel tonight. Really appreciate that. Very informative, very helpful. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. That's my final word.
Deborah.
Deborah, what you got to say?
Thanks, everybody. It's
All right.
super inspiring. And I just want to give a props up to Richmond for being a leader in this movement, for looking at alternative ways to reduce violence and to uplift communities, and to thank the people in Richmond for being willing to actually forge a path not taken by others, and to share what we've learned with others too. I'm really proud to be part of this group.
Thank you, Deborah.
Anybody gonna do the Russell Simmons?
God bless and good night.
Thank you all for coming out.
Oh. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, brother.
Appreciate it.
Stay healthy, everyone.